Hi everybody, it's Marcus Collins with MA Properties with a market update. We've just passed the middle of the year, so we'll take a look at the first half of 2023. Lots to talk about, so let's get started. Relatively easy to get information today, much harder to make sense of it and use it to your advantage, and that's really what we're about here. You're going to see an awful lot of graphs, a lot of analysis that will take you through exactly what's happening in the market. And it'll be very local. I mean, that's the key. There's an awful lot of headlines down there about what's going on in the housing market nationally. And really what matters, and you'll see that as we go through here with the Lexington data, what matters is what's actually happening in the town. And it's very, very local. So I'm going to show you lots of information here. Where do I find this information if you want to have a look at it afterwards? Because I'm going to focus on Lexington here. If you go to our website and you go to the statistics tab, you will find lots and lots of information about 15 or so different metrics you can look at for about 50 towns. So if you're not interested in Lexington, maybe you're looking to move out of Lexington into another town, take a look at the information that's on there. You say lots of it for about 50 towns in the greater Boston area. So lots of information. The other thing is we're going to look back a little bit at what happened in 2022. Those of you who are living in Lexington or perhaps came to an open house and picked one of these up, you will be able to remember we put out the Lexington Market Review in January this year. Going to go back to that a little bit in terms of what happened in 22 and really what are the implications for the first half of 2023. So what are we going to look at? Single family will be first. We'll then take a look at the luxury market, and our definition for that is homes which are over 2.5 million. If you remember, we increased that. Traditionally we were at about over 2 million. We moved that up to 2.5 just because the average is now bumping up to what was our luxury. We'll then take a look at new construction, condominiums, and then we'll give you kind of a wider perspective about what's happening, and then get our crystal ball out to see what we might see in 2023, maybe even 2024, but 2023 at least. So first off, let's take a look at single family. So here's the first graph. It's the inventory level. That is how many homes are available to buy, in my case, on the first of the month. I do it every month, so that's monthly data. Going back since 2013, we have data on the website. Goes back much further. What's interesting is you can see a definite cyclic pattern to this. A low in January, a high in May or June, and then guess what? It drops down again until the following January. Except, and I'll use, if I can highlight with this, except for 2023. Here's January 22, there's the traditional dip. January 2023, you can see that dip's missing. We're about 20 or so, 25 homes more than we saw in 2022. And we've really lost that kind of cyclic nature. And that will be important as we talk about the rest of what happened in the first half of this year. Take a look at home sales. These are home sales, not listings, these are home sales. Blue is existing homes. The green color is new construction. And then the orange color are the so-called off-market teardowns. Homes that don't actually come on the market. They're bought by developers and then converted into new construction. I've put in there my projection for the full year. A little early to be that accurate, clearly, but we can certainly get a good indication of where we are, plus or minus perhaps 20 homes or so in terms of sales. And as you can see, we're predicting that we will get about the same number of home sales in 2023 as we saw in 2022. Which was, as you can see based on the graph there, a lot less than we saw during COVID and about consistent with what we saw in 2018 and 2019. If you remember back that far, pre-COVID, there was lots of discussion around correction in the housing market. Were we going into a recession? COVID kind of clearly threw that one blew that one out of the water, if you will. But we're now in that kind of relatively low number of home sales, around 350, just a little bit below that, more like about 330 if you take out the off-market teardowns. So we're back to the kind of where we were when there was a somewhat negative attitude to the housing market back in 2018, 2019. You can see where we are day to day looking at cumulative sales. So this is cumulative sales based on the under agreement date, but I look at under agreements here as opposed to solds. And as you can see, we're tracking very similar between 2023, which is the pink color, and 2022, which is the blue color. So about the same as where we are last year as we are this year. So less home sales, but let's take a look at some other kind of key metrics that we're tracking. First one is days on the market. Been declining down to 24 days in 2022. As you can see, that rose today anyway, up to 41 in 2023. The numbers you see for this and some other metrics too are probably as good as they're going to get. The spring market, about 40% of homes sell in the spring market, actually close in the spring market. And so after that, the housing market isn't quite as buoyant. And so days on the market of 41, probably as low as it's going to get. In fact, it's likely that it will dip a little bit higher as the year goes on. So clearly not as strong a market as we saw in 2021 and 2022. The other metric we look at is the sale price to list price ratio. That is the home comes on the market at 1.2 million, sells for 1.2 million. That's 100% sale price to list price ratio. Traditionally, prior to COVID, we were around about 100%. That was where Lexington was. It didn't move very much, up or down, 101, 99. It didn't really move around very much prior to COVID. Rose in COVID, and then as you can see, we're dropping back to about 102%, a little bit higher than we've seen in those prior years. But again, like days on the market, it's likely that 102 is the high point. It could well be that number will dip down as the year progresses. So 102 for the year so far. Interesting note to compare where we were last year. So if you remember last year, we had this very buoyant first half of the year. We characterized it as the year of two halves. Very buoyant first half of the year. And then the second half of the year dropped quite dramatically as interest rates rose. And as you can see there, 98, 98, 97 in the last 3 months of 2022. Fast forward now to 2023, looking at month by month data, you can see we are that little bit higher. 106, and so on. You can see we're just that little bit higher. So not quite in the doldrums of where we were in 2022, but certainly not as buoyant as we were in the few years prior to that. What's interesting, and now we're kind of going to get to the nub of what is happening in the market here. What's interesting is to compare what that ratio is, new construction versus non-new construction. And that I've done here. So existing homes is the blue, new construction is the green. You can see new construction is much lower. If you think back to that first graph I showed, which was the inventory level, we didn't see that reduction in the number of homes available to buy in January that we would ordinarily have. The reason for that was overcapacity in the new construction market. If you looked at the homes which were available in January, the vast majority were new construction. 12 months prior to that, there were almost none on the market. So we saw very much an overcapacity in the new construction market. And so what's happened here, and this is influencing both sale price to list price ratio and days on the market, is that those homes are taking longer to sell and the developers are having to reduce the prices, which you can see here, 97, 92, 95%. They're having to reduce prices to sell those homes. Because unlike homeowners who can stay in their home for 12 months perhaps, developers can't. They have to sell the homes, and the only way to do that with an oversupply of homes, of course, is to reduce the prices. And so what you see there is that overcapacity in 2022, developers building too many, price too high, they didn't sell. Now, as we came into early 2023, the developers are reducing the prices of those to sell those homes. And that's why you see those metrics lower. Interesting then, if we think about the number of home sales, if we had not had that oversupply in 2022, would we see less home sales in 2023 than last year? I think it's likely that we would. that number of home sales has been pushed out a little bit higher because we've had such a carryover from 2022. So to some extent, that's masking a kind of a slowdown, if you like, in certainly of less listings, less sales, and a slowdown in the housing market that we would ordinarily have. So what about prices? Where are we with prices? Well, interestingly, they look like they're higher. 1.7 was the average in 2022. 1.9 is the average in 2023. But remember, we did see a lot of new construction homes selling in the first half of 2022. Certainly more, 2023, excuse me. Certainly more than we saw in the first half of 2022, and definitely more than we saw in the second half of 2022. And so that skewed that average somewhat, because the average new construction home is about 2.8 million. The average non-new construction home is about 1.8 million. So there's about $1 million difference. More new construction selling has skewed that average somewhat. I'll get onto the median in a minute. For those who were kind of waiting for that, has skewed that average. So this average is in fact higher than it would ordinarily be were it not for those new construction homes that sold in the first half of the year. If we look at splitting 2022 and 2023 back to that kind of year or two halves last year, you can see that that average is actually higher than both the first half of the year and the second half of the year. But as I said, that's been skewed somewhat by those new construction homes. And you can see that with the median. Here's the median. As you can see, it's about exactly the same as it was last year. So we really haven't seen very much price appreciation for homes. It's just that the average is higher because it's been skewed because of more new construction selling than we would ordinarily expect in the first half of the year. So let's take a look at the luxury market. If you remember, last year it was a very buoyant. We saw about 55 homes selling over 2.5 million last year, very high. Still looks relatively buoyant this year. Remember though, most new construction are in this kind of luxury price bracket. Number are, the majority are. So that's kind of skewing those numbers somewhat higher as well. But it does look like the new construction market is going to be not as buoyant as we saw last year. So the luxury sales is not going to be as buoyant as we saw last year, but still relatively strong part of the market. Days on the market, unsurprisingly, it's rising. It was 40 last year. This year, it's almost 80. It's almost doubled this year for over 2.5 million. So, a weakening of the market. You can see that less sales, longer on the market, and that sale price to list price ratio dropped from 101 to 95. So homes are having to drop their price on average by about 5%. Luxury homes over 2.5 million are having to drop their price by about 5% to actually sell. So that's interesting. So definite weakness in that over $2.5 million price bracket. Here is the price distribution, and here I track both 2 million and above, excuse me. And if you look at the height of those graphs, 2020 all the way through to 2023, you can see, if I can highlight here, that in 2022, we saw about parity between 2 to 2.5 and 2.5 to 3. We were at parity, about 32 versus 35, about the same number of home sales. Fast forward to 2023, you can see that the price bracket which has taken the biggest hit in terms of the number of sales has been that 2.5 to 3 million. So a weakening of this sector of the market, somewhat as well, over 3 million as well, not as marked, but certainly this 2.5 to 3 is really where we've seen a net reduction in the number of sales, and that's where that weakness is coming in the market is coming in. All right, new construction. Let's take a look at that. Again, number of home sales. Looks like we will get around about the same number as we saw in 2022. But remember, as you can see here, 2022 saw a dramatic reduction in the number of new construction sales in comparison to what we saw during COVID, from 60 to 40. And it looks like we'll be tracking about the same as 2022. Remember also that an awful lot of homes that were built in the second half of 2022 are beginning to sell in 2023 after the developers have done their price reductions. And so that number, the number of new construction home sales in 2023 looks high, but actually is a consequence of price reductions for homes that were originally built and listed in 2022. Sale price to list price ratio, around about 90, whole 90, 99 has dropped down to 93. That's a relatively low number. We've not seen that number for a long time, actually. You have to go back really to 2008, 2009 before we saw a number in that kind of 93 price range. Price distribution, very similar. Similar characteristics, no surprise that what we saw in the luxury market. Very strong last year in the 2.5 to 3. That 2.5 to 3, very weak this year in terms of the number of sales. So again, that 2.5 to 3 is where we've seen the weakness in the market. Interesting too to look at the teardown versus new construction price. So what I've done in this graph, sorry, it's quite a lot going on in it, if you will. The blue line is the average new construction price. The red line is the average price of off-market teardowns. And then the bars, the orange bars, are the number of off-market sales, so-called teardowns, if you will. So as you can see, we've seen a relatively rapid rise in the new construction price, but that's now trickled down. That pushed to higher prices. What we found is that in the first half of the year, developers have had to come down, albeit only from an average of 2.9 to 2.8, but still a definite reduction in the average new construction sale price after we've seen really a rise all the way from 2015. So that's kind of interesting and as a consequence of what I've just talked about. But what's also interesting is if you look at the red line here, the average price developers are paying for teardowns off market hasn't moved really since 2019. It's still 800,000. We talk about the rule of thirds. That is, developers think about a third for acquisition, a third for build, and a third for profit. 3/8 of 24. So based on an $800,000 off-market teardown price or acquisition price, if you will, and we would expect to see a sale price of around $2.4 million for new construction. Even with the reduction that we saw this year, we were still at 2.8. So we're still considerably higher. And this is why you see so many new construction homes being built in Lexington. Developers can buy teardowns for 800,000 for reasons that frankly escape me, but they get away with it. But they sell not for 2.4, but they sell for 2.8. So clearly there's an awful lot of money being left on the table by those homeowners who sell their house off market to the developers, upwards of $200,000 to $300,000 at least, based on a $2.8 million final sale price. So that's something to bear in mind. We've talked about this a lot. I'm not sure we've had much effect, but we've certainly talked about it. So there it is writ large in a graph, the fact that developers are not paying as much as they would were they forced to sell or forced to compete, excuse me. So let's take a little look at the condominium market. Condominium market is split, here's the condominium sales, is split between new construction and existing homes. And it does take, given there are very few condominium sales in comparison to single family, as a new development comes online, it usually puts a whole load of homes on the market, new construction condominiums, and that skews the averages and so on. And you can see the blue is existing condominiums, that's Drummer Boy, Potter Pond, and so on. And then the green are the new constructions. And you can really pinpoint each of those new construction. Jumps 22 was this, 11 was that. Or 22 is actually, most of those were the homes on Emerson Gardens. And so this year we've not seen any new condominium developments come online. And so I'm going to focus a little bit on the existing condominium sales as opposed to what's happening with new construction in condominiums, just because there weren't very many. Looks like we're going to get about the same number of condo sales as we saw last year. That was less than we saw in 2021 in terms of existing homes, so 66 in 2021, 53 in 2022. Looks like that might be around the kind of 55 mark So about the same existing condominium sales this year as we saw last year. Data on the market actually lower, which is interesting. Now, some of that may well be that in 2021, where we were 28, 2022, we were 25, new construction tends to sit on the market longer. So those numbers may have been artificially inflated because of new construction. So it may well be that the reason we've got a relatively lower number this year is those are existing condominiums, which tend to sell quicker than the new construction. Sale price to list price ratio around about the same, 104%. So on the face of it, perhaps it might even argue a relatively strong market, but let's kind of carry on, look at some of the data to see if that actually is the case. Here's the sale price to list price ratio by month. You can see it kind of relatively low in January and then rose upwards to 106 and 105% as the year has progressed. In terms of average sale price, though, here I've excluded new construction. It's almost exactly the same. So we've not really seen any appreciable price appreciation in 2023 in comparison to 2022. What's interesting to look at this, though, is if we split 2022 into the two halves, if you will, that kind of year or two halves, we saw buoyant sales in the first half of 2022, much lower in the second half of 2022. And 2023 has exceeded what we saw in the second half of 22, but nowhere near as strong as we saw in the first half of 22. So kind of about in the middle, if you like. And that's kind of where we are price-wise. So slight price appreciation, but not that much in comparison to where we were last year on aggregate. Quick look at the new construction. There were very few, but I thought I'd put it in here anyway. Actually a little bit lower. These were actually not in condominium developments. They were standalone, two condominiums next to each other, a duplex, if you will. So really can't really read very much into the new construction sale price of condominiums. So what's driving the market today and kind of what's going on? So unsurprisingly, it's all about mortgage interest rates. You can see here the rapid rise we saw in interest rates in the second half of 2022. But what's interesting is that we've really not seen any movement in those interest rates over the last certainly 2 months or so. All the predictions, when I just jump to those predictions now, this is the latest data we've got for the predictions for interest rates. And it's interesting, as we move forward in a quarter, so they bump the predictions up for the next quarter. So it does look like we're going to be in the sixes, maybe even the mid sixes for the rest of 2023. So interest rates still having a major impact. And they're the major impact really on what's happening in the market. It is those interest rates is the challenge. I'll talk more when we talk about the predictions, why that's the case. The other piece, which is, as I've talked about a lot in this market update, really was the fact that we had an awful lot of homes that sat on the market in January. We didn't see, carried over really from the second half of 2022, we really didn't see the drop we would ordinarily see. There was a lot of residual inventory in the market that is beginning to sell and is selling in the early part of 2023, but it's being sold at something of a discount. New construction being the great example here. You can see that the difference between existing homes and new construction sale price to list price ratio, that's really what's in some cases being something of a damper on prices and things like that. So what does it mean for the rest of 2023 and maybe even 2024? So what's happening today is that an awful lot of homeowners who have discretion, if you will, in terms of being willing to sell or able to sell. Perhaps they want to, but they're not really in a hurry to sell. Maybe they could sell next year, they could wait a year or two, are staying put because they really don't want to swap a 3% mortgage for a 6% or a 6.5% mortgage. So that's having an effect of really drying up inventory, or drying up supply in the market. And if there's no supply, then the buyers can't buy. And so that's the first consequence of mortgage interest rates being as high as they are, is that sellers, potential sellers, I should say, don't want to sell because they don't want to move to another home, perhaps a move up seller, and lo and behold, they're going to go from a 3% mortgage to a 6%. It doesn't really affect that much the downsizers because in many cases they're either taking out a small mortgage or no mortgage at all. But it does have an impact on move up buyers, move up sellers, if you will, sellers to become buyers. So that's really putting a damper on the market. What's also happening is we are seeing buyers being somewhat reticent about paying certainly the prices they were willing to pay or competing in the way they were willing to compete in 2022. That's really not happening. There is very much a sense of price it right or it will sit on the market. And we've seen that in many cases with homes. They come on the market, they look a little overpriced, and sure enough, they don't sell as we would have expected in that first weekend. And so, back to the fundamentals really as a seller, because buyers are, being cautious. From a seller's perspective, what you really need to do is start focusing on the fundamentals. Make sure the home is a product that buyers want to buy. Make sure it's presented well, it's marketed well, and it's priced appropriately. Putting it on the market overpriced, always been the kiss of death, even more so this year. You just end up getting death by 1,000 price cuts. So fundamentals are really key. There seems to be, with interest rates staying at this 6.5%, no increase in the number of sellers coming into the market. We will have to wait at least to 2024, perhaps even a little bit longer, for those sellers to be able to say, yes, interest rates have gone down to a level that makes sense for me to be able to move. And so we will see tight supply, certainly the rest of 2023, and probably coming in to 2024 in terms of supply. In terms of buyers, a number of them have seen the merits of, for example, ARM mortgages versus 30-year fixed. Taking out a 5-1 ARM, that allows you to chase interest rates down because it's likely interest rates will indeed come down, certainly in the medium term. And so an ARM product, a mortgage product, will allow you to kind of chase the interest rates down, unlike a 30-year fixed. And so a number of buyers are out. They see that, yes, now's a good time to buy. There isn't enough for me to buy, but they're out there buying. And with an ARM mortgage, I'm able to kind of say chase interest rates down. So very much a tight market this year, both in terms of the number of sellers and in terms of the number of buyers that are out. So don't expect anything dramatic to change in the second half of 2023. It seems very unlikely. It really will come in 2024 when we begin to see what the interest rates do and whether that kind of frees up some of that supply and means more buyers in the market. Having said that, if you put a home on the market and you do the fundamentals, homes are definitely selling, and they are selling well. 3, 4, 5, 6% over asking price is the average. So it's not that putting a home on the market now is the wrong thing to do. You just need to focus very much on the fundamentals. No surprise there, I guess. So that's the market update for the first half of 2023. I hope you found it useful. Lots of information there. I went through it relatively quickly. I said that was 30 minutes looking at the timer that's ticking over there. If you have any questions, you want to kind of get into any of the details here about what's happening, perhaps delve a little bit more into your price range, perhaps look at different towns if you're looking to move to a different town, please do reach out to us. We love talking about this. But with that, I'll say thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye.